Kairi, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing a very overdue review of all of the SPFBO books I've read thus far as a judge. First and foremost, let's talk about this acronym SPFBO. Myself and others, I think, are guilty of assuming that everyone knows what this means, but if you think about it, it is still a pretty niche term. So let's go over what it means before we even get started here. SPFBO stands for Self-Published Fantasy Blog-Off. It was started by Mark Lawrence. As far as I'm aware, out of the goodness of his heart, he decided to make a competition where it was just an open submission and people who were self-published could submit their books once a year to be judged by 10 teams. The cutoff for submission is 300 books, so it's basically first come, first serve. And then those 300 books are split between the 10 teams, 30 each as a slush pile. Those 10 teams then read through the 30 initial books that they received. It doesn't have to be a full read through. You can DNF at like 20-30% because it's a lot of reading, lots of pages, and depending on how big the team is, it's a lot to take on. So 20-30% is usually, considered acceptable for the first kind of read through the slush pile, and then that team will vote on which book is their finalist. Now within teams, at least in my experience, the team that I've been on, multiple people will usually read the same book if the initial reader wants different thoughts on it, so you can bounce off of each other, say I liked this, I didn't like this, and kind of debate and figure out what your overall thoughts on that book will be. But in the end, each team comes out with usually 5 or 6 semi-finalists and then 1 finalist. Now, becoming a semi-finalist is a big deal. I think that's amazing. It means that a fair few amount of people who are reading with a critical eye read your book and thought, this is pretty fucking good. So I think being a semi-finalist is amazing in and of itself, but there can only be 1 finalist. And in my experience, actually, with Before We Go blog, I'll get more into it later, but that's the team that I'm on, we have had a very heated debate every year between what our finalist is going to be. There's always 2 top semi-finalists, and we really have to duke it out amongst ourselves which one we're going to nominate as the finalist. So it's not just like a cut and dry competition. This is way above the others. In my experience, it's a pretty, close battle between the ones that we get in our slush pile. Of course, there are some that I don't consider to be my favorites, and we're going to talk about those today, but that's going to be in a personal capacity. So yeah, let me go ahead and go into the disclaimers before I get started. This is going to have a long intro because I operate in 2 capacities with these books, so I just want to make it very clear what capacity I'm in right now. I'm on Team Before We Go blog, run by Beth Tabler. I'm also an assistant editor at the website, so I do post just normal reviews there as well, but I'm also part of their SPFBO team, so there's kind of 2 places where I post reviews and I do work on the blog. And as part of the team, I never post my personal thoughts before the results are released on Before We Go blog. Whether it's a book that I'm reading from the slush pile and we're releasing, my thoughts on it, my review for it, whether it's a cut, a semi-finalist, all of that. Whether it's in that capacity or also just choosing a finalist, the results of our debates, I don't talk about those things until they are officially released. So with that in mind, everything I'm going to be talking about today is from SPFBO 8, which was last year, and that's why I say this is an overdue video, because I meant to make this ages ago, but here I am, we're talking about it. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the SPFBO 8 books that I read, and also up till this current point in SPFBO 9, which is the ongoing competition. So recently all of the teams just released their finalist, as has Before We Go blog, and that finalist this year is Cold West. I will talk more about my personal thoughts on all of those books, including Cold West as well, when we really get started on this video. But I need to make it clear that the reviews and the way that I talk about books here do not reflect on Before We Go blog as a whole and how the books did in the competition overall. Reading is subjective, and that's why we do it as a team, because we can get the majority rule, essentially. So while I may have differing opinions to how some things in the competition went, it doesn't mean it's not deserved. It doesn't mean this book isn't for someone, for many people, clearly. I just want to make sure that I make it very clear that these are my personal reading thoughts, not my thoughts in a professional capacity as a reviewer for the competition. Now that we've gotten that extremely long disclaimer out of the way, let's start talking about some books, shall we? I was introduced to self-published books, I think, almost 3 years ago now, and that is due to Lana. Her channel used to be Lauren Lullabies, but she's changed it to the India Chords, and she used to kind of run that account, but I think she's taken a step back, so I'm not sure she's active in this space right now, but she is the person who I owe my love of self-pub to, and I'm just eternally thankful to her for that. So self-published books, there's just so much out there, and it's hard to know where to start, but there are so many golden ones. And I think SPFBO is a great place to start if you want to start looking into self-pub, because the books have already been vetted by so many people. There's a plethora of reviews by multiple people usually already out there for you to see if it might be for you. I think if you're looking to get into the self-pub world, this competition is a really good starting point. So first, let's start with the slush pile from SPFBO 8 last year. The only book that I solely read and was responsible for the review and cut for was The Killer and the Dead. I ended up DNFing this, I think, at about 30%, and there were elements of this book that I really did like, but I couldn't sink into the world, and I felt myself distracted pretty much every time I sat down to read it. It's extremely vicious. Like, the main character lives in the slums of his city, and, you know, some places might kind of romanticize the slums a little bit, and, you know, make it look a little bit more glamorous in order to make their character look a little, you know, less nasty in the view of the reader. This book does not do that. The main character is a serial killer, and he likes it. He doesn't really have a reason for it, but he likes it, and he's, you know, making his way through life, getting paid to do what he does best in many ways. And I do like the unapologetic nature of the main character of this book, and the world was fascinating as a premise. But for me, the writing itself and the story just lost me repeatedly. I felt like the magic system wasn't put on page in a way that I could really grasp. But if you like cutthroat, like trigger warning level gore and grimdark worlds, this very well may be up your alley. But for me, I DNF'd it and cut it from the competition as a judge. Then the next book I read was one of the semi-finalists, and one that I personally think should have been the finalist because I loved it so much, and that is Spirits of Vengeance by Rob J. Hayes. I love the War Eternal series by Rob, so I already knew that I liked his writing, but this was my first foray into this world that he's written, which there's Never Die as well, and I think another book, which are all standalones but can be read together. They're kind of like companion novels within the same world, at least as far as my understanding. But Spirits of Vengeance was my first foray into it. At first, I was actually really hesitant to read this series because I live in Japan, and this is a Japanese-inspired world, and I find that I'm more nitpicky about books that have to do with Japan more than I would be in other settings because I live here and because I'm married to a Japanese man and have kind of been entrenched in that culture for quite a while now. I find that I'm almost unfairly critical, so I wasn't going to pick it up kind of on my own. But then when this book came up as part of the competition, I was like, well, this is my sign, let me read it. And Rob knocked it out of the park. His research on yokai must have been extensive. It was, as someone who loves mythology, folklore, yokai, I actually have a series on my channel where I talk about different yokai and mythology from Japan. So he took the basis of those stories and then did something new and unique with it, with the knowledge of where he was coming from. It was just so well done. Outside of those characters and that development, it was just a really fun story. We're dealing with immortals, which can lead to, you know, tensions being low because you don't think anyone's going to die. But he handled that really well, as he does in The War Eternal as well. Just his ability to up the stakes when you think they can't be upped anymore, it's just, oh, it was so good. So basically we follow our main character. I can't remember character names. Okay, y'all are just going to have to forgive me for that. Okay, it's a sickness, all right? But we follow our main character whose job is to travel the world and basically banish evil spirits. He's an immortal, or very hard to kill, let's say. And he's been doing this job for a very long time. And then through his travels, he ends up amassing this kind of found family dynamic, which I'm a sucker for, so this is another reason why I really think I enjoyed the book. And there's also this little side character named Shiki, who reminds me of Makuro Kurosuke, the the soot sprites from like the Ghibli universe, and I was living for it. So there were just so many things done well in this book that were close to my heart and tropes that I liked, that this was my favorite book from SPFBO 9. And while I fought hard for it, and it did end up becoming a Senlin, which is that we offered it for another team to take as their finalist, another book ended up being the finalist, which I'll talk about in a minute as I talk about, you know, all the finalists from all the teams. But this book ended up being a semi-finalist in the end, and I think it is more than well-deserved. And if it sounds up your alley, go pick it up. Okay, now let's talk about all of the 10 finalists from SPFBO 8. The one that came from Before We Go blog is the 13th Hour. Now, this book is extremely popular. I know so many people who love it, and it just does wonders for them. They love the world. They can't get enough of it. For me, it did not work that well. I couldn't sink my teeth into it. It felt like I was skimming the surface of the world the whole time, which if you've been around my channel, you know is something that I don't really enjoy. I like to really be able to sink into a place, and it didn't feel like that for me. I also couldn't connect to the characters, even though there was like a found family thing going on. That was actually one of the only things that I really enjoyed about the story, but it still wasn't enough to make it really work for me. So I think I ended up giving this like a 3.5 in the end, because I do think the writing is quite good, although there were some areas where that also didn't work for me. But we had, like I said, a heated debate on Before We Go blog, and this book won out because so many people adore it and love it. So clearly I am in the minority, and this book has a lot of fans out there. So the main part of this book takes place in a world called Chime. This is like a center world, and there are, I think it's 12 different worlds branching off of this center place. And each of those 12 worlds is ruled by an individual god, who is I think the name of the series is the Cruel Gods series, and they are cruel. I think that was also one of the things that I really liked about it, is the gods are not merciful. They are gods, and they decide to live the way that they choose, which is often squashing people below them like ants, and they're not sorry for it. So I did really find that aspect of the book intriguing, but each of these 12 worlds is ruled by a god, and then the center world, Chime, is the one place where the gods don't have control. And so we have all of these different castes of different types of people, and our main character is of the lowest caste. So she lives underground. She works kind of in mines and a space analogous to that. Analogous to that. I can't seem to say that word right the first time. Analogous to that. We follow her and kind of her ragtag found family group as they try to do little things to usurp the power structure. And then, of course, things get a little crazy from there. Each race also has a unique magical power associated with them, which I did think was really cool. I wish it had been developed more. That was one of the things that I felt like I was skimming over. But if that sounds interesting to you, as it has been to a lot of people, definitely pick this book up. Now, I didn't end up reading all 10 finalists. I was able to read 7 of them, which I think is a pretty good number. So I'm going to talk about all the other 6 books that I read that were finalists from other teams. This one, though, Mysterious Ways. I'm very happy that this was a finalist, and I'm happy for the author. Props to you. Clearly, this book hit the right spot for some people. But I enjoyed 0 seconds of reading this book. Everything about it annoyed me. Everything about it got on my damn nerves. The writing did not work for me. The setting should have worked for me and yet didn't, because it has to do with like gods and underworlds, which sounds very, up my alley. Not in this case. The characters annoyed me. Everything about this book did not work. It's been a really long time since I read it, and I think I tried to erase a good chunk of it from my mind, honestly. As it was a finalist, I didn't allow myself to DNF. I finished it. And that's one of those things where if you're not enjoying what you're reading and then you force yourself to finish it, I think it makes you have more kind of resentment towards it. So I think that's not helping this book right now either. But it was a finalist, so it worked for some people. Our main character is this kind of roguish underground character where they deal in like the black market and things like that. And she has this kind of nemesis cop character who's always trying to catch her, and then one day this rogue character is dealing with a demon and gets caught. They're making a deal with the demon, and those two foil characters are forced to be together and kind of work in a partnership. It sounds good. on paper. And if you do pick it up, I hope it works for you. Go check out the reviews. But for me, not even a little bit. This next one, though, I loved this book. And that is A Song for the Void. If you can't tell that I loved it by the fact that I bought a physical copy of this book, that means a lot. I still want to buy a copy of Spirits of Vengeance. I just haven't gotten to it yet. That's actually a crime, honestly. I can't believe that slipped my mind. But I knew I needed a copy of this right after reading it because we get ebook copies as judges, and I wanted to, one, support the author, and two, be able to tab all of the beautiful writing that I loved in here. I mean, just the intro, the prologue, it grabbed me right away. It's beautiful. I guess it's not a prologue, but in my head it felt like one. Oh, okay, it's chapter 1, but it's basically 2 pages, so it is a prologue. I can read a small section from it. There is a quiet on the sea that speaks to a whole which rests in the center of our souls. When one stands on the deck of a ship, gazing up at the night sky while far removed from the artificial lights which illuminate the world of man, one is able to finally witness the extraordinary vastness of the universe in full measure. The descriptions in here, they're so good. There are many things that I love about this book, but one of them is the exploration of addiction. Let me not get ahead of myself. Let me give you the premise first. So we're following our main character. I have the book here. Let me not say main character. What is the main character's name? Apparently the name isn't said for a couple pages, and I don't want my battery to run out on here, but we follow a doctor, okay? And this doctor is on a warship in the middle of the Poppy War. So this is a historical horror fantasy is kind of the best way that I can put it. And so he's on this warship that is just way out into the depths of the sea. And this star-like thing appears in the sky. And slowly but surely, the people on the ship start to go a little bit insane. And at first, as we follow the POV of the doctor, we see this happening to other people. But little by little, maybe he's starting to go a little cray-cray as well. And as I said earlier, he plays with and works with this idea of addiction, not just in the physical sense, because this doctor was previously addicted to opium, but in the more metaphorical, kind of broader sense with the cosmic horror element that he works into the story. There is a lot of graphic violence, one particularly sexually violent scene that I think would be good to look up trigger warnings ahead of time. Some people think that it's gratuitous. That's one of the things that I heard from others when I was kind of debating about this book with people in the competition. But I think personally it served a purpose for me in the narrative, and it didn't feel gratuitous to me. But there is a scene like that, so just to be aware. There is a lot of other graphic violence, but in general that doesn't bother me as long as it has a point, and I very much think it has a point in this book. Those visceral scenes combined with the beautiful prose, I knew I had to have a copy of this book. It's 5 stars. Honestly, I would love to reread this. It's been a minute. I flew through it the first time, so I think I would the second time too. Okay, I'm taking way too long on each individual book. Let me go a little bit quicker so we aren't here all day. But the next one that I read is Scales and Sensibility. This is exactly what it's advertised as. It's a rom-com in a book. It's a lot of fun. There are dragons, but they're like little pocket-sized dragons that sit on people's shoulders. So this is a Regency romance with little pocket-sized dragons, and it's wonderful. There isn't anything particularly surprising or new about the plot of this book, but I loved the world and had such a great time in it, so I ended up giving this 4 stars. In a very similar vein was Miss Percy's Guide. I always get this wrong. Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Keeping of British Dragons, I think is the full name. Again, we got dragons, we got a Regency setting, it's cozy. Our main character is a spinster, basically, who thinks that she doesn't have any prospects in life, and then her life gets turned upside down when she gets an inheritance that she doesn't expect. Again, there was nothing that blew me out of the water with this book, but was I happy and thoroughly enjoying myself and feeling, warm and cozy while reading it? Yes. So if you're in your cozy fantasy era, this is for you. Second to last, from SPFBO 8, we've got A Touch of Light. This book was on my radar from way before the competition. It's advertised as having griffins in it, and it does, but I do think that I was expecting them earlier than they appeared. I've heard that they show up a lot more in the second one, A Shade of Madness, which I still really do want to get to. This book wasn't my favorite. There were just some things about the plot that I couldn't get on board with, some of the pacing that didn't work for me. One of the POVs felt really slow, the other felt fast-paced. And so when you care about one POV more than the others, it can kind of make for a stilted reading experience, and that's kind of what happened with me. And there's a little bit of that world skimming, too, that I felt personally. But I do think that the depth of the world is definitely there, and I hope that we go into it in later installments. I ended up giving this a 3.5, but just because it wasn't my absolute favorite doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy certain aspects of it. And there are griffins, don't get me wrong. I think I just had this, that was like a huge selling point, so I think I went in with expectations that maybe hurt my review of this book. But I have heard that those griffins are very much more on the page and in your face in the second one, so I do want to get to it eventually. This also deals a lot with religion as like a power structure and a force in society, which I love. So that aspect of this book was phenomenal. And that's another reason I really want to continue, because I would like to see the way that Thiago develops this. Not only is it a power structure, but the religion itself is very unique. It frowns upon death. So those who have died should be forgotten and not spoken of anymore, and that is so interesting to me. I haven't really seen that done before, so would love to see how it's developed in the future. And finally, the winner of the entire SPFBO competition, and the only other book that I bought from the finalists, Small Miracles by Olivia Atwater. I forgot what it was called for 2 seconds. I hate this cover because it does not do this book justice, but I did back the Kickstarter, which has a beautiful edition coming out, so can't wait to have that in my hands to show off. But this is cozy fantasy at its absolute best. We follow Gadriel, look at me remembering a name, who is a fallen angel of petty temptations, and we follow them as they go through their duty, trying to increase each person's sin-o-meter, sin points, by indulging in small, little sins throughout the day. So giving in and getting that whipped cream on your latte, like little things like that. Then Gadriel gets strong-armed by a gambling debt by a fellow angel to help them out with a particular charge that they have, who just won't sin. She is too good. And they need Gadriel's help to kind of let her indulge a little bit. And so we follow the story from there as Gadriel takes on this charge. It's so delightful and warm and cozy. The little details in this book, it's phenomenal. It made me laugh out loud so much. The dry humor of Gadriel is just, it's delightful. All of the yellow tabs here are laughter, so clearly I was having a grand old time when I read this book. The only gripe that I have with this book, which I did talk about in a review that I did for it in the wrap-up when I read it, I think. So I have mentioned this before, but a lot of cozy fantasy will pick a comfort food to kind of focus on. And this book picks chocolate. And while chocolate is a wonderful choice, and it is very much a cozy food, I do think it's mentioned a little bit too much, to the point where it loses some of its efficacy. I think that the end has a really nice little plot inclusion with chocolate, so it's not like it's wasted that it's mentioned, but I do think it was a little much for me. But that was literally the only thing that bothered me about this book. Too much chocolate, which is arguably not going to be a problem for a lot of people. So those are all of the SPFBO 8 books. Congratulations to Small Miracles on winning last year's competition, and on the Kickstarter that did phenomenal after that. But let's go ahead and move on to SPFBO 9. As I mentioned before, all of the teams have released their finalists, but we haven't moved any farther than that in the competition, so I'm only going to be talking about books that I've read up until this point. The first one I read was Truth of Crowns. This was a DNF and cut from me from Before We Go blog. This was another case kind of actually like the Killer and the Dead, where I really liked the setup of the world, and actually the prose in the prologue was phenomenal, but then I felt like the prose kind of disappeared for me later. I really liked the setting and I liked the ideas, but the application of those ideas and the pacing, it just wasn't hitting for me. I found that I couldn't focus on it for the life of me. Every time I sat down to read it, I was just, what am I going to have for dinner? I should clean that. Let me do that. And it wasn't working. So for me, I ended up DNFing at 30%. But if you like really dark magic, this book is definitely based in dark gods, dark magic, and familial ties, lots of familial strife. We follow multiple POVs, but one of them is a young prince who does not agree at all with what his father has been doing with the throne. So there's a lot of fraught political and familial relationships. So if that sounds up your alley, maybe check this out. But for me personally, it ended up being a cut. The next book that I read from the slush pile was Miss Covington's. This is another cozy fantasy. This is one that I read with multiple other people on the team. And for me personally, I ended up giving this maybe a 2.5 stars. I did finish it, but I did recommend for this to be a cut from the competition. I do think that it has a lot of elements of really cozy fantasy, but again, that skimming thing for me. I felt like the elements were there, but we didn't get to really enjoy them, embrace them, spend time with them. There were even animal companions in these cute little capybaras, but they seemed to only be there as kind of a throwaway, or the fact that they were there at all was supposed to make it feel cozy, but I need to care about these cute little capybaras, and I felt very distant from them. And that distance kind of felt like it continued with the main characters for me as well. So I just really couldn't connect to this one in the way that I wanted to, but I did love the themes of kind of we're better together and working against prejudice in your life and acknowledging like privilege and stuff like that. I really liked those themes that existed in this book, but it just wasn't enough to pull through for me. The next one that was a cut in a DNF from me was Of Deeds Most Valiant. This book caught my attention from the very beginning. I was expecting this to be a 5-star read. On the first page, our main character is caught between a rock and a hard place. She's dealing with this demon possession issue in the middle of a battle, and we immediately go into her head in that moment, kind of trying to figure out what to do in this situation. And the inner voice that our main character has, as well as the snark and the wit of the other inner voice we get, it was so much fun. I laughed out loud in the first chapter, or at least in the prologue, quite a bit. So I thought this was going to be an amazing read for me, but unfortunately, that kind of investment slowly petered out as I went through. Maybe it was a pacing issue for me, I'm really not sure. But as a quick summary, in this world, we have a god that has different aspects. I think it's 10 different aspects, and then there are priests who represent that different aspect of the god. So there are priests who kind of represent the suffering of the god, and they take sickness from people who are sick and take on that burden themselves and that illness themselves. There are priests that show the goodness of this god, so they're kind of like prince-like people. I really like the idea of the religion in this book, but again, I just couldn't sink my teeth into it. So I ended up DNFing this one again around 25-30% and cutting it. Now we're down to the final two that I've read so far for this competition, one being Petition and the other being Cold West. These two were the ones that went head to head in our group, in our team. We really had a lot of people fighting for both sides. Fighting in a friendly way, of course. We weren't at each other's throats, but we had people that really believed in both of these books. I personally was Team Petition because I could not put Petition down for the life of me. The main character is an immigrant into this world, and she has, through multiple sacrifices of her own and of her parents, slowly climbed up the ladder of this world by merit. There are these houses that control magic and power in their world, and you can become a trainee and then an employee of these houses if you work your way up through the system. And she has done so to a certain point. And we enter the story where she's trying to kind of move up to the employment level and then kind of have her family set for life. So of course there are trials that she has to pass, and just the action was so well done. It was fast paced. There is a romance there, but it's definitely on the back burner, and I loved that the author played with this trope and really spun it on his head. Like, if you like romance in your books, you might find what she does with this really intriguing, but just it's not what you would expect. Okay, I'm doing a bad job of explaining this, but I do love what she did with that part of this book. The magic system is fascinating. You channel through these like crystals that you can wear in different jewelries, different accoutrements, and different crystals have different levels of power, which can, you know, because you're funneling through it, that can really, you know, determine how much of your power you're able to access. It's really, really interesting. And on top of that, I love our main character. She is sassy and plucky without being unlikable. Her hard outer shell is completely understandable based on what she's gone through in life, and I just love how the author explored those aspects of her personality. But while Petition put up a good fight with myself and a couple others in the corner, the winner from Before We Go blog, the finalist for this year, is Cold West. I'm not mad about it though. I think Cold West is a great book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It is phenomenal at what it does, but what it does is, it's a lot. It's dark, okay? You want grimdark? You want no hope? You want no mercy? That is this book. It, just when you think it's not going to go there, it goes there. Let's put it that way. And it's not gratuitous. And I think Snyder did an amazing job in that way, because with the amount of violence and just ruthlessness that is in this book, it could come off as gratuitous very easily. But it doesn't, because it does all have a meaning. Because Snyder had a point to the story, something that he wanted to tell, and he definitely was able to tell that story. So I think this is a really well done book that does what it sets out to do. I just felt like I needed to take a shower after reading it, to be honest. Now that the teams have all released their finalists, we will all read them as a collective, and then early next year we will be releasing the winner, or announcing the winner for the SPFBO 9 competition. So please keep your eyes peeled. There's Facebook groups, Discord, Twitter, lots of places where we update, but you can also go to Mark Lawrence's website. He always collects all of the information and puts it in one place, which is just an amazing thing that he does. So if you want to track the competition going forward, go ahead and check out his website, and he'll have all the links that you need. I will have links for all of the books down below, as well as links to the Before We Go blog SPFBO 8, if it still exists. I assume it does. All of our reviews, and SPFBO 9 review page. Thank you so much for sticking with me for this long. This video was not supposed to be this long, but here we are. So thank you if you're still here. If you're just getting into self-pub, let me know in the comments down below if any of these books, you know, sounded interesting to you. If you've been in the world for a while, have you read any of these? What are your faves? I would love to hear in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!